Hello and welcome to this QuizCon webinar. My name is Peter Baddeley.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone again for attending today. My name's Peter Baddeley. Sarah's already introduced me. The topic of today's webinar is the ultimate data retrieval and display. We're going to be looking at a number of QuizCon web parts which help with displaying data from various sources. I've got a few slides which we'll just do to just set the scene, and then I'll dive into a series of demos. As Sarah said, please submit questions as I go through, and we'll try and answer all of them at the end of the webinar. So what am I demonstrating today? I'm demonstrating QuizCom's data view tools for SharePoint Online. They're a set of SPFX web parts, so these are modern web parts designed for modern SharePoint sites in Office 365, and they're addressing common data connectivity requirements, so connecting to all sorts of different data sources across Office 365, and also a number of display requirements which people commonly have in terms of how they present data. Now, there's a number of web parts which make up this toolset, some of which we're going to show you today. They're available each individually, including the list view web part, the list aggregator web part, the image gallery, the org chart, and soon the calendar web part. But they're also all available as part of the Data View Plus toolset, which gives you all of the capabilities I'm going to show you today and much more as well. And I'll explain a little bit about that when we get to that aspect of the webinar today. So how do all these things work? Well, firstly, they've got a great UI, a really nice modern UI to work with, a sort of Lego builder type UI. So if you ever played with Lego when you're younger or you still play with Lego, then they've got quite an easy to use responsive UI where you can just drag and drop different components of the web part to build them up, easily configure them either as an end user, a power user, or an admin if you want to. And they can connect to a variety of data sources. So they can connect to data stored in SharePoint, possibly across multiple sites and site collections, data in Excel, data from SharePoint Search, and also perhaps most excitingly, data from the Office graph. So being able to actually connect to the different components of the graph, such as users information, files, emails, tasks, and other information. These web parts are also very extendable. So if you've got customization skills, developer skills, and you want to add your own actions or ways of displaying this data, you can do that as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that during the webinar as well. We're going to show you a variety of things. So I'm going to show you data being displayed from SharePoint lists, either a single list or multiple lists, and how we can manipulate how that data is displayed. And I'm also going to show you displaying different types of data and displaying it in very different ways. So being able to connect through to details of our users and really easily visualize those in an organization chart. All of these web parts fulfill sort of common requirements which people have in Office 365, and they're very simple to set up, and I'm going to show you a series of those now. So let's just dive out of PowerPoint, and I'll switch over to my browser. So I'm just using a regular SharePoint Online tenant here, and I've got a series of demos which I'll go through with you to demonstrate each of the individual web parts. Firstly, just to set the scene, I've got a simple list here in SharePoint. I'm managing a list of suppliers, and it's got a few columns of information. So it's got the name of the supplier, it's got the city, a type, which is a choice field, it's got a status, which is also a choice field, and I've got a review date as well, so a date when a review happens associated with them. So fairly simple list with a few records in them. I can do some basic things with how those are displayed within SharePoint Online, but ultimately I start to hit some quick restrictions in terms of how I want to set that up and present that information. So our first demo is we're going to look at the List View Plus web part, where I can connect to that list. In this case, I'm connecting to this list within my same SharePoint site, but that could be in a different SharePoint site or even a different site collection if we think in the sort of modern team site world. So I'm going to connect to this page which I've created here, and I'll show you one which I prepared a bit earlier, and then I'll talk you through and show you how we actually set this up as well. So here you'll see the list view web part connecting to that list, and you'll immediately see that this looks a bit different. It looks a lot richer, looks a lot more friendly and capable to the users. So firstly, I've been able to break these records down across different tabs. In my case, I'm using it based on status, so I can see some are approved, some are pending. So a much nicer way to present that data, especially if I've got lots of information, or actually in my case, because I don't want to present the pending ones front of screen. I've got other options available to me. So I've got some menu options here to either select all of the items or export that data out to CSV as well. So some nice simple options immediately available to get that data out into a format which I can work with in Excel. At the top here, I've got customizable filters available to me, so I can search and find information, and that can either be a general search or searching on specific fields, so I can search on supplier types. Now I can type in there, but even better, I can just click on this little option here, and because this is using looking across my choices, I can see, well, actually I'm interested in people who do office supplies, and that will filter it down immediately. And you can see I actually, as I do this, I get different options. So I can say, well, actually, I'm interested in transportation. You see it still keeps my tabs in place. And I also get options up here to actually do that a bit more. So actually select multiple or all except transportation. So I can do and easily apply these different filters, even build these up multiple across different filters I've got here. Other things I've got available to me is I've got actions. So over here, I've got a configurable set of actions which are available for me to use. And these actions can include doing things like viewing the item properties. So I can see some properties about that, get it in a little quick pop-up window, the information about that. I can send an email, so I can email the properties of that item out to specific people if I want to as well. I can actually open the new item form, the view item form itself, and I can also open the edit item form as well. So if I want to go in and make some changes to that item, I can do. So very easy, very intuitive, no need to sort of do things like right clicks or launch edit menus or other things like that, which the users might find confusing. The nice thing is this is all customizable either by the owner of this site, the people who manage this specific site, or even the end users can customize some of this on the fly as they work with it. So actually, let's say I want to change some of these options. I can do these straight away. So I can actually say I now want to change my grouping to be by city, and I can just drag and drop that. I can actually say that I want to change the filter, so I'm now going to move status up here as a filter. I can do that as well. So I can quickly change these around as an individual user and save those for myself to use. Alternatively, if I've got permissions on this site and I modify that web part, I can change these settings for everyone. And that's that principle of a very flexible interface to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this web part now, and then I'm going to show you how it's put together and how I built it up as part of what I've been doing for this demonstration. So just going to go and add a web part like I would do normally, and I've got a series of QuizCom web parts installed on here, including the List View Plus. It will then ask me to configure this web part. And so I go into the properties here. Notice here I can specify the URL of my SharePoint site. So if I want to connect to that to a different site to display that data, I can do. So really useful if that data maybe resides in a different place, but I want to present like a filtered version of it somewhere else. Maybe in this case my suppliers, and I work in a specific department and I only want to display certain suppliers on my site, but that data resides somewhere else. I'm going to connect to my current site because that's where my list resides. And I'm going to select from the different lists available. So lists and libraries, so you can work with libraries as well. I'm going to choose suppliers. And I've got some options here around choosing whether I want to work with a specific view. So if I've got certain views I want to connect to, I can do. And also the number of items. And it's really that simple. The web part's then added with a number of predefined controls against it. So you see here, I've got these different components which I can build up as part of my control. So I've got the data itself presented in a table in this case. I've got an option for a paging control if I've got lots of items. And I've also got my menu bar at the top in terms of controlling what actions and functions I get available. I can change the way this data is presented. So I can present it as a table, but if I want to, I can also present it as a list of information. So just a different way of presenting that information. And then I can easily go about adding the other components which I want to include within this specific web part. So let's say I wanted to add either, you've seen tabs, so you've got the options for tabs. I can also add groups. So I can add a grouping in, and it will default in this case to use status. Now I can either use the option menu here to configure that control, or I can just simply drag and drop. So I'll just say I want to drag and drop supplier type there. And I can change that. And because I'm changing this in edit mode, I'm changing it for the whole of the web part available to everyone. I can do other things here. So maybe I want to add filters, and I can select where I'm adding them as part of this control. So I'm going to put some filters up at the top here. And you see my filter control comes in, and I can continue to customize that filter control if I wanted to as well. So again, adding additional filters if I wanted to. I can either drag and drop them, or I can just click add here and add the fields to filter by as well. So very configurable, very easy to work with. This sort of web part only takes a few minutes to get familiar with, and then a normal end user will be able to customize this themselves. I can take that customization a little bit further. So let's remove our groups because we'll keep this specific example quite simple. And I can customize what controls are available here within my listing of data, my table of data. So I'm going to click here and configure the control. And then this shows me some of the options I've got available. And each of those control areas, the table, the paging, the filters, each are configurable with their own set of settings. So you can see here that I can do things like configure which columns are included. So by default, it's just showing the fields from that view. But if I wanted to change that to just show specific fields which I wanted to, I can do that here. So I can go in and select which columns I want to present there. And I can also define things like when I click on the item, what will happen. So at the moment, it selects the item. but I could do other things like it views the item or it calls a custom command or an action which I've defined. At the bottom here, we've got a series of our actions. So these control the behavior. At the top, we've got the item click, so that custom item click control. And then we've got 4 actions here for each of the things which sit to the right of the data. So let's say, for instance, I no longer want to use the email control, and I click edit. That will take me into the customization for this control. Now this is where it gets a little bit more advanced, but QuizCon have helped you with some predefined examples which you can use in here. So let's say I wanted to do a map because I've got a city field. I go in here and there's a series of icons included. So let's search for a map icon. That will do, I think. I'll give it a little tooltip. So let's say open map. And then here is where the action actually is defined. And it's using JavaScript to do this. So don't panic if you're not familiar with it and you can't use it like myself. You can there's some predefined ones included as part of the web part, and I've got them available under item actions. So you can see here I've got things like call phone, edit item, and I've also got show city in map. So I'm going to add that one in there as my action. And if I click out of this, that's been updated. And then if I edit that, if I close this window and hit publish, we'll then be able to show you that specific additional action happening. And if you've got development skills or you've got access to developers, then you could have some JavaScript included for you, which would then perform a specific action of your choice. And that's where these controls are extendable. They're handling all of the nice thing about connecting to data and displaying that data, but then you can put those little bits of advanced functionality around it. So let's take this specific one. And if we click on that, there you can see it opens up a little map interface with using Google Maps to pinpoint my city. So really nice. This sort of thing, if you were trying to develop it or build it yourself from scratch, would have taken days. This is taking me a few minutes to set up. So that's the List View Plus web part. We could probably spend the whole webinar looking at that, but there's a few other things I obviously want to show you as part of this webinar. So the List View Plus is about connecting to one SharePoint list or library. The next web part I want to talk to you about is the Aggregator web part. So this is about taking data from different data sources and aggregating that up. So it could be taking data from Excel. Equally, I could be taking it from multiple SharePoint sites, or I could connect to other data sources as well. So you see here, I've got a task list displayed, but these are actually aggregating from 2 different SharePoint sites. So I've got a SharePoint site here called Project 1 with a series of tasks which are just numbered 1A, 1B, 1C. And I've got another SharePoint site here called Project 2, which has got tasks 2A, 2B, 2C. These are, in this case, separate site collections, so separate modern SharePoint team sites. And in here is in here my Aggregator web part is connecting to both of those lists and aggregating the tasks into a common list, displaying certain fields from that task list, and then even doing a grouping so I can see those tasks grouped by status. All of that same capability which I showed you with the List View Plus web part is also available. So being able to put in paging, tabs, filters, all of those can be included as well. So how do we set this up? Let's just remove this web part and we'll add it again fresh and talk you through the setup process. So we're connecting and using a different web part this time. So we're using the list aggregator, and we're going to go into edit. So this web part supports a few different data source types. We can connect to Excel, we can connect to the Graph API, which I'll talk a little bit about in a short while. We can connect to SharePoint lists, or we can connect to SharePoint search data. So maybe when you're wanting to search across lots and lots and lots of different site collections, SharePoint search might be a bit more efficient at delivering those results. So I'm going to choose SharePoint list aggregator. Now there's two aspects to what I'm doing here. Firstly, I need to define a reference list. It can be one of my lists I'm aggregating data from, but I'm just telling the web part in terms of what am I using to define how this is displayed. So I'm going to just base this on one of my task lists, and I'm going to say, let's base it on this list, and I'm going to base it on the task list. And I can say what default view, maximum number of items. I'm just telling the web part the sort of data I'm connecting to. Next, I'm actually connecting to each of those data sources I want to connect to. So I'm going to go in and add each of the data sources. So firstly, we'll go in and add project 1. Notice here we've got different options in terms of how something is aggregated. So do we want to take the entire site collection? Or if you're still using sites and subsites, then you can do that sort of model as well. And then I'm going to provide it with the URL. So that's clearly a different site to the one which I'm using. And then there's various ways I can tell it to get the data by the name of the list or other things like that. But because I'm just using one of the predefined list types, I'm going to select tasks. And then I'm going to enable that. And you'll have probably seen that the data starts to pull in. And then I'm just going to do that for my second site. So I kept my naming conventions quite simple. So I know that that is number 2. And it's a task list again. And turn that one on. Really is as simple as that. So there's all my data coming in. You see an example there of the paging control as well. And then if I want to, I can just customize this list in the same way which we were just customizing the list view plus. So that could be going in, adding groupings, tabbings, filters, whatever you want to add to it. It's incredibly customizable, very easy to work with. Okay, so let's look at a different type of data source. Let's look at connecting to information about people, and specifically presenting that data as an org chart. So again, I'll follow the same principle of showing you it and then walking you through how it's set up. So this is using the QuizCom org chart web part. It's connecting to data stored in my Azure Active Directory using the Graph API. And you can see here that I've got a selection of people displayed within an organizational chart. So it's presenting that information. Now I've configured this web part to only automatically display certain layers, and then I can explore this organizational chart in the way I want to. So maybe I want to expand this layer, and see the people who operate under that specific layer, and then further expand that to see specific people. Perhaps that's not what I'm looking for, so I want to have a look at what sits under sales, for example. So let's expand out sales, and you can see that this org chart automatically adjusts really quickly. That's the person I was looking for. I was looking for the marketing manager. So I can click on that person, and it pops up and provides me more information about that person. So I can see their telephone details, options to do things like start a Skype conversation with them, send them an email, or even provide a number of custom actions which you can define as well. So very easy to work with, very easy to find the data I want. What else can I do with this control? It works like all the other controls we've already been working with. So I can do things like search. So I can say, well, actually, I'm only interested in finding people in the sales department. That will then filter my control and just show that part of the tree, which I can then expand out and find the specific people I'm looking for. There's other controls I can do here. So I can do things like export that as an image. I can print that, or I can even view the data in a list format so I can view and analyze that data a little bit better. So really flexible and easy to work with control. So let's go through how we set that one up. So let's again, just so we can show how quick it is to set this up, create this web part from scratch again. So in this case, I'm looking for the org chart. Now, we can connect to a number of different data sources. If your Azure Active Directory's not got the sufficient information in, you could connect to an Excel file or a SharePoint list. I'm going to connect using the Graph API. So this is how we can query data within the Microsoft Graph. Now, you can use something like Graph Explorer to get the specific data connection you want to connect to, and any filters and other things like that. So you can see what's the pathing graph I'm connecting to, what's the columns I want to pull back, any filter controls. So this is a little bit more advanced. You need to know what you're doing around this sort of piece. But the best thing is there's a series of examples pre-set up for you, including an AD org chart. So this will connect to your data stored about users, and then pull in certain predefined fields and implement a sensible filter about whether it's enabled accounts and excluding things like external users. And there's various other options. I can include additional properties, and I can go through and define the different column information which I'm pulling through, and also certain mappings within the org chart. But again, this is all pre-set up for me, so unless I need to get into quite an advanced scenario, I don't need to worry about this. Now you see that this org chart's come through, but it actually looks a little bit different from what we've seen previously. And that's because there's two different types of org charts available to us. So there's this option here, which is org chart 1, and there's also another option, which is org chart 2. So that was the one I showed you earlier. I can also view the data via individual cards and filter and look for that data. Let's switch back to org chart 2. Now each of these options has some settings which we can configure. So we can go in here and do things like define the number of levels to show by default. So I'm showing 2 levels by default at the moment. Let's say I want to show 3 levels by default. Anything around zoom, the line type, even controlling things like the orientation or default colors. So let's say I don't like blue. Let's say I want to use green instead. I can easily switch that around and adjust the presentation of my org chart. I've got all these different options I can turn on and off if I want to. So I can do all of that. And I can also do little bits of advanced customization, which people are often asking for in the org chart. So maybe I want to highlight a specific person in the org chart. So let's take our president of sales. Because I'm in edit mode here, I get a little edit option here. And if I click on that, I can then configure the behavior for that specific person. So let's say I want to present this in a slightly different way. So let's say I want this with a hexagonal photo, and I want this person to be displayed in a different color. So let's say I want them to be displayed in purple. I can do that, and that person is then highlighted differently. And there's a series of different controls available to me. So I can do things like display them as a note instead. And they're just displayed a little bit differently on screen. So there's lots of different ways I can cut and slice my org chart for the specific setup and use cases which I want. And again, all customizable, really quick to work with, and supports all those other things we've seen like filters as well. Okay, so one last demo and then we'll wrap up and we'll have some questions. So the final thing we're going to look at is the Data View Plus. So firstly, the Data View Plus is the consolidation of all of these web parts, plus a few extra bits like pictures and other things like that. But it's also a way of connecting to all sorts of other data and presenting that. So let's look at a couple of examples here. So one of the things we can do is connect to the Graph API. So here I'm returning my recently edited documents, and that's looking across my OneDrive and also SharePoint sites as well. And I've got those same options to do things like groupings, filters, have custom actions available to me. It's a great way of doing things like my tasks, my activities, my actions. The other thing which we can do with the Data View Plus web part is actually implement our own completely customizable controls. So I've got a simple risk list managed in SharePoint. In this list, I'm managing the name of the risk, I'm managing the probability of it happening, and also the severity, as well as other fields of information. Now, either you can build your own custom control using HTML and JavaScript, or you can use some of the predefined ones which are included within the Data View Plus web part. And this one I'm just displaying here. So I'm displaying my risks. I'm displaying my risks at the top here. And then I'm displaying those in this matrix where I can look at probability versus severity, and dependent on those settings, it will then display them in the appropriately colored area. So this is just an example which one QuizCom customer wanted to be able to use, and that's been made available within the web part. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into this web part because we've covered a lot of things already in this webinar. But just to show you that when we go in and add it, it's incredibly customizable. So it's taking the power of each of those individual web parts and bringing them together with a great deal more customization options. So if we add the Data View Plus web part and we go in there and edit it, we start off by selecting what type of information we want to connect to. So in this case, we can connect to data in Excel, we can connect to the Graph API, we can connect to list data, we can connect to using the list aggregator, or even SharePoint search. So for example, when we connect to a SharePoint list, we can then do things like access those custom controls around how they are presented. So if I go into risks, for example, and then close this down, if I go into the specific data control now, I've then got a lot of options here in terms of how that's presented and how that specific information is then formatted. So I've got a lot of flexibility and capability around how that data is presented. And that's all available and easily accessible in the web part, including, as I previously mentioned, just wait for my screen to catch up, being able to present that as a custom control and defining that custom control either from um, either writing that yourself or using some predefined options available to you. So, for example, the risk matrix, as I showed you. So the fantastic things about these web parts is they all work in a similar fashion. They're all easy to work with, easy to manipulate, incredibly flexible, so all sort of drag and drop, and they suit all different types of audiences. So they suit end users, lower level power users, all the way up to developers who want to be able to add their own enhancements. I really like them because they fit into the modern story, which Microsoft is encouraging. They're also incredibly low cost. So this is such a low point of entry to get this sort of capability and solve problems really, really quickly. And that's why I think they're really nice.
Thank you for watching this QuizCon webinar. If you'd like further information, please contact QuizCon using the details shown on screen.